I did notice that like 3 years into the job, especially my friends in tech,
Yeah.
like the progression is exponential. And I remember talking to him and I was like, hey, you said you wanted to work in a startup. What happened? And he was like, yeah, but they can't afford to pay me what Google is paying me. Why have my parents worked so hard doing things that they didn't want to do because they had to do it to raise 2 kids, just for me to repeat the same cycle?
What is the world you came from and what made you decide to came to Harvard?
I grew up in a really small town in India. It's a small town called Vellore. It's in the southernmost part of India. Before that, I grew up in an even smaller village. Imagine a population of 40,000. Now, to people in the US, 40,000 might seem like a lot, but for people from India and China,
Yes.
that's nothing.
Right.
I think growing up in a small town influenced really how I think about the world, the people that I grew up with. I think one of the benefits of growing up in a small town, especially when you go to school in a small town, is you don't really think about class and wealth too much, mostly
yes.
because there's very little to do in the town.
Yeah.
All your friends have to go to the same place, you all bike together, there's like one movie theater in the entire town, and you don't really notice differences in class simply because everyone has access to the same opportunities.
Right.
So I think the first like big shock in my life was when I moved to Bangalore, which is a tier 1 city in India. It's the tech capital of the country, for my undergraduate education.
Okay.
And that's when I realized, I was like, oh wow, there's massive differences in how people live in this world. And also when you're in Bangalore, which is a city, you notice that like you can very quickly move from like the richest part of the city with all the tech billionaires and go to like a slum where people are living in very difficult conditions. And I think that was probably one of the biggest shocks that I had, both culturally and in just opening up how big my world was. I think the second big shock was working in a nonprofit. I worked with a small startup nonprofit. We're called Guardians of Dreams. We worked mainly in issues of child protection, essentially supporting children who grew up in orphanages and shelter homes in India. And I fell into it kind of accidentally. This is an embarrassing story, but I remember it was my first semester of college, and I was still trying to figure out, wow, there's so much to do here.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
Right.
And then there was this really pretty woman who came to class, and she's like, hey, we have this exciting volunteering opportunity. You'll get to meet students from other colleges. Come join us. And I just remember thinking, wow,
She's very pretty.
Yeah, one, she's very pretty. And two, she is who I want to be, just how confident she was. So I ended up applying to be a volunteer with this organization. I stayed as a volunteer for 3 years, led a couple of volunteer teams within the organization. And then when I finished college, I realized I didn't want to do science. And I was like, I set up a coffee chat with one of the founders of the organization, and I told her, I really like the team. Can you just give me any job to do? And she said yes. And I stayed with them for 6.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, tell us more about this organization.
So at Guardians, we don't personally run orphanages and institutions ourselves. We instead support founders of childcare institutions.
Okay.
This is a small quibble, but I think the word orphanage is the most commonly used, but I think it's actually pretty inaccurate because in India, a majority of the children who grow up in orphanages actually have at least one parent or they have grandparents to take care of them. Instead, you have a really large number of privately run institutions. And they're all small. They're run by, I think, truly well-meaning people, but they simply don't have the capacity to care for so many kids at scale. What we've been trying to do is figure out how we can support the founders of these institutions.
Right.
How can we support the caregivers of the children within these institutions? And the age of children can be anywhere between 6 to 18. It's intended to be like a pit stop. If you come into an institution, we find a family for you, right? Like that's the hope.
Yeah.
But given just the sheer prevalence of poverty in India, it ends up happening that many kids just grow up their entire lives within the institution until they're 18.
So when you say those organizations are privately owned, can I think of them as like a grassroots NGO?
Absolutely. They're all non-profits. Some of them are religious institutions, some of them are not. I think the average profile of someone who's not backed by a religious institution is just someone who really likes kids. And either they haven't been able to have their own kids, or even if they've had their own kids, they want to care for more children. So I'm going to open up a small little home for maybe 3 or 5 kids.
Okay.
The problem is when you do this kind of good work, word gets around, right? And
Right.
it's very hard for the founders to say
Say
no.
no to the families who need help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So before they know it, there are 30 children. And now, when you have 30 children, one, you have to figure out how to take care of 30 kids, which is
Right.
an entirely different problem. I mean, you have a kid, you know how hard it is with
Yes.
one child. Imagine 30 kids, but now you also have to run an organization.
That's right.
Because at that point, you stop being a caregiver, right? You have to hire people. You need to hire cooking staff. You need to hire tutors. You need to raise money. And now you need to find someone to do the compliance, report to the
Yeah.
government. Now you've basically become an entrepreneur even though you didn't sign up. And that's incredibly hard work, especially when you haven't been trained to run an organization. So the best founders that I've met tend to be the best caregivers, but they tend to struggle with operations quite a bit. It's also a very underpaid sector, right?
Yeah.
If you can imagine that these are small nonprofits
Right.
that are struggling to raise money, think of who is likely to be the people they hire.
Yeah.
Any guesses?
I would assume they hire volunteers
That's
and
a-
like college students.
So that's a really good assumption. One, they rely a lot on volunteers, but you also, these kids stay there the entire time, right? It's not like an after school program. So you need full-time caregivers,
Yeah.
but you can't afford to pay them too much. So instead, what you end up doing, and this is the most common pattern that I've seen, is you hire other men and women who are themselves struggling to find shelter.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, so you hire other men and women who, say, are slightly older. Let's say their children have like abandoned them. Let's say they're not able to earn money anymore.
Okay.
So they come to the institution asking for help, and the founders often say, hey, why don't you care for the kids? You get a roof over your head, you'll get food.
Oh, that's so interesting.
It's an interesting model, but the challenge is that a lot of these caregivers themselves come from very difficult backgrounds.
Yeah.
Because they've gone through trauma themselves. It just makes the whole problem
Even harder.
Like it doesn't always work. And one of the biggest issues that we've talked about when we talk about the work that we do to funders is a lot of donors in India, at least small donors, let's say like my mother and small retail donors who just want to do good, when they think about doing good, they want to see the change materially.
Yeah.
They either want to give food, or
Yes.
they want to support someone's school fee,
Yes.
or they want to give clothes.
That's right.
And one of the challenges that we've had is, how do you tell people that actually the biggest investment they can make is in like human capital?
Yeah.
How do we pay these caregivers better salaries? How do we hire more college educated people to be in these spaces? And I think this is a really big issue in India that's now slowly changing is can we stop thinking about nonprofits as charities
Yeah.
and instead
It's
think
an
of them
industry.
as industries of impact?
If we take a step back and think about, you were a college student
Yeah.
who came from a smaller village, and I assume you didn't get lost in the big city,
I didn't, yeah.
but I'm sure you were shocked, right? With a lot of cultural shock and like environmental shock and everything. And usually, with how people develop in our like teens and 20s, right? Like you start to want to prove yourself before you can give.
Yeah.
Most of the time, that's the case.
Yeah.
And you just dump yourself into a very challenging situation of giving. And how was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think a couple of things that I want to like maybe touch on is one, the question of privilege,
Yeah.
right? Like even the privilege to give. If you see the nonprofit sector in India, at least people like me, they typically tend to be children of families with money and education.
Right.
Now, I grew up in a small town, yes, and that was for my dad's work, but both my parents are college educated. I'm upper caste. And I think it gave me like a safety net. Of course, my parents, typical South Indian parents, were very particular about education. You have to do well in school, and I did well in school. But even for them, this was like hard to understand.
Yeah.
For a few years,
Yes.
my mother was quite confused
Yes.
about what I was doing and why I was deviating from the path that I had set for myself. But I think a huge part of being able to do this work that I found very interesting and meaningful is that my parents were supporting me. Like a year into work, my mother moved to Bangalore, which is the city that I was in.
Yeah.
I was living in her house. I was not paying rent. So I think a part of it is definitely the privilege, right? I think the second part of it is I didn't look at the work that I was doing as giving. I looked at it as just a really interesting problem to try and solve. And in the sense, if you think about it, the estimates of kids who live in these institutions ranges anywhere from 3.5 million to like 20 million, right, in India. And that's just and that's one study. Unfortunately, we don't have particularly good data on this. This is a large, very difficult problem to solve because the nature of these institutions is completely different in different parts of the country. And the whole time I was working there, I think for me it was just, how do we even make a dent in this problem? So I was definitely approaching it from like, this is just an intellectually interesting problem to try and solve.
Yeah.
I will say the one part of it that felt concerning to me was that I might be falling behind my peers.
Yes, that's what I was gonna get at, right? Like graduated from, I assume you went to a really good college.
Yeah.
And it's in a tech town, right? Like most people would do what the tech people do, right? They go after the big buzzwords and the opportunities, and while you're like staying behind to do something that's intellectually challenging for you, but not necessarily in the definition of excellence among your peers. What was that feeling like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was for a while a big challenge. I remember when I started working, I told one of my founders that, so I'm going to be here for 2 years and then I have to go to grad school. Like I have to go do my master's because that's just what you do. I remember him laughing and saying, set a calendar reminder for 2 years and let's see. He was right. I didn't go to grad school in 2 years. I think the reason I wanted to go to grad school is it was easier for me to justify this decision to my friends by telling them that, oh, but this is just like a pit stop.
Yeah.
I'm just here for a couple of years to get some skills and then I'll go to a good school and I'll fall back in line. I think that's one thing that I did quite a bit. I think another thing that I initially struggled with was the concept of money, right?
Yeah.
Like at that point, luckily a lot of my friends were early career, just like me. So you don't notice too much of the difference.
Yes, that's
right.
right.
Like maybe someone's making like 1.5, 2 times more than you, and that seems fine because in total sum you're both not making that much anyway.
Yeah.
I did notice that like 3 years into the job, especially my friends in tech, like the progression is exponential. It's not linear.
Right.
Whereas for me it was fairly linear. I was still like just slowly dealing with your like typical incremental cycles.
Yes.
And I think first getting comfortable putting that out there. And the second bit was thinking about, again, this concept of like privilege. This is an opportunity that I have because of the circumstances that I am in right now. This is deeply meaningful work. Now, I get to do this because thanks to my family, they have money, at least to sustain me. Unfortunately, not generational wealth. And I think one, being open about it, and two, thinking about the fact that this is just an opportunity that I have, made it easier for me to get comfortable that this is a trade-off between joy and interest in the job and money.
Right.
And most decisions in life suggest these trade-offs.
Yes. That's
I remember talking to a friend who at that point was moving from like one big tech company to Google.
Yes.
And Google was like 1.5xing his salary, which was already a lot. And I remember talking to him and I was like, hey, you said you wanted to work at a startup. what happened? And he was like, yeah, but they can't afford to pay me what Google is paying me. And I was like, sure, but you don't need this money. His parents were pretty well off. He was already building a house and he was 24. And I was like, what is happening? Why are you making this call? And this is someone who didn't enjoy his job.
Yeah.
So he wanted to move to a startup because he was really smart and he wanted to find something more challenging. But once you get trapped in that, well, this is what my baseline is and I can't go below that.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's super hard. And I think seeing the other side play out, where people would hate their 9 to 5 for 5 days a week and then really look forward to the weekend.
Yeah.
And for me, it was flipped. Like, I really enjoyed my job. And obviously, I made less money. I think I just saw these as two different ways of living the world.
Yes.
And I don't think one is better than the other. This friend of mine loved traveling. He got to travel like across the world. He took time off. He had the money to do it. So it worked for him.
Yeah.
For me, the reason why that didn't make sense is, well, you have 40 hours a week where you're working, at least 40. If you're in a startup, more like 50 or 60. That to me seemed more valuable than the 16 hours, 20 hours that I get on the weekend. Trying to figure out if
Wow,
I enjoy that.
Yeah, that's very well said.
yeah.
That's actually very well said because, you know, I've worked in NGO before.
And you also moved from a...
I moved from a corporate job, right? So it was a
Exactly.
very lucrative corporate job that ate up my soul, and then and then I told you I took an 80% pay cut to join an NGO. Like to today, people thought I was like out of my mind, but
How did you feel the need to justify it to them?
I think I've worked long enough that people trust my judgment. Like when I tell people I make this decision, people start to think like there must be something there. You just have to justify it for yourself because for me, that was a brilliant choice because I was on the edge of going into depression and like mental health issue, but like because I jumped into the NGO world, met a group of very, very like-minded and brilliant people, that's what saved me and like bring me up out of the water. So
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Is like, when should you do this?
yeah.
I don't know if there's a prescriptive answer, except I think if you have, again, the question of do you have a safety net? And I got lucky because I have a safety net. But if you have a safety net, I think you should try as much as you can to find something meaningful to engage in this world, right? Because, and that doesn't have to be a non-profit job, but I think it should be an interesting problem.
Yes.
And I would tell my friends this. I'd be like, why have my parents worked so hard doing things that they didn't want to do because they had to do it to raise 2 kids, just for me to repeat the same cycle? I will say the one thing I didn't expect was working with a really good team makes it very hard for you to accept, well,
Anything.
substandard teams.
Yeah.
It's
Well, that's
raised the
thing.
bar too much now.